Hi, my name is Charles Lee, and I want to thank you for spending a few minutes with me today. Today, I want to share with you a little bit about this topic of leading innovation. The way that I want to frame our time today, just for a few minutes, is talking about framing the work of innovation. 2 is developing a process for innovation. And 3, as a leader, really integrating and leading forward. So let's jump right into the topic. The first one is framing the work of innovation. I think it's really important before diving into really leading change and innovation is to think about what type of innovation are we really trying to solve for. When you look at the research and the work around innovation around the world, you'll know that innovation generally lands in 3 big buckets of thought or 3 areas of focus. The first one being systemic innovation. And this type of innovation really has to do with innovating or changing or problem solving for the actual strategy of a business or organization. So when you look at multiple different brands in the world that are systemically changing the way we think about a category of business or even as a nonprofit organization, these are systemic innovations that probably require specific types of individuals in the room as you try to solve for that problem. You probably want leaders at the highest level of an organization involved in this type of innovation. And this type of innovation requires significant investment of resources and manpower to really change from the foundation of an organization and allow this type of change to trickle through all the way throughout every touch point of an organization. The second type of innovation, or the second area of focus for innovation, is what's called core product innovation. And this is basically taking something that you're already doing really well in and making it even better, or producing new products or offerings or services or programs and making it that much better and additive to everything else you're doing in the life of an organization. So this is really having creatives in the room, people who are working with the product or service or program in the room, making changes to make what you're already doing well and making it even better. The third type of innovation area of focus is what's called customer experience, or some people may refer to it as brand experience. And this is basically innovating the way that those you serve experience what you're offering to them. And so this type of innovation is really getting developing deep empathy for who you're ultimately serving and understanding what you're doing from their perspective. It's going out of the way to really understand the customer experience, or if you're running an organization, those who are stakeholders and recipients of the benefits you're providing, that you would understand exactly where they are coming from and what their actual needs might be. So when you think about innovation, first of all, it might be important to think about, is it a systemic one? Is it an innovation as it relates to your core offering or product, or is it a customer service innovation? The other thing is, when you think about creating or framing innovation, it's really important to understand how innovation flows through strategy. In most organizations, you will have some type of strategic plan, whether it's a profit or purpose formula. And generally what happens is, taking the strategic plan, you will end up allocating resources accordingly. And once these resources are allocated, that's when strategic action takes place. In other words, the resources start producing action that ultimately turns into actual strategy. And this is really important. You can have a strategic plan, but the reality is that what you're actually working with day to day is your actual strategy. What happens in interactions within the organization or with those you're serving, that's the actual strategy that's being produced. And as you're working day to day with your actual strategy, you'll end up with 2 different potential scenarios. The first is that you'll get a better improved understanding of what works and what doesn't work when you're thinking about problem solving. Now, if you come up with things that you realize that, hey, I can make what we're doing better, that becomes what's sometimes referred to as deliberate strategy. In other words, strategy that fuels back into really your core strategy as an organization. It really aligns well with the DNA of the organization, and the idea is to take your learnings and make your strategy that much more better, and then continues the cycle as you see on the screen. The other thing that sometimes happens as you're living out your actual strategy as an organization is sometimes an emergent strategy comes forward. In other words, ideas or new ways of doing things that were kind of unexpected. And as a result, you have a decision to make, whether or not to try to incorporate it into your current context, into your own actual strategy, or allow this emergent strategy to spin out and become its own thing. Now, in most cases, in business cases over the years, what we've definitely seen is that when a new idea that is not necessarily contrarian, but clearly different from the core DNA of a company or organization, the recommendation is usually set aside a separate team to allow that unique idea to grow into something that is probably different. And many companies have tried to force a new idea into their current offerings and have had it backfired multiple times. While other brands, you may have, in the recent years, seen when Facebook acquired Instagram, Facebook allowed Instagram to remain Instagram. And I think that was a wise decision on part. Instead of making a Facegram or calling it something else, the reality is the team at Instagram needed to work on its own to continue to create a great product, a great company. And so innovation strategy formation is really to be mindful to say, hey, we have a strategic plan, but once we run it through resources and actions, something may birth. And this is where if it helps your organization become stronger, the actual strategy, then it becomes a deliberate addition or a deliberate strategy into your core idea. If it becomes emergent, we have to let it kind of move on to something else. The second is developing a process for innovation. And the core question we ask when we think about innovation at Ideation is, what is the real job to be done? There are things that we do on a day-to-day as leading an organization that we produce great offerings or programming or ideas. But the real thing is, beyond that, why do we do those types of things? For example, in our case, we work with executives of all different types of brands and industries. And while we bring benefit sometimes often to the bottom line or to the success of a brand, the real job that we're doing is actually helping the executive become successful. And so at the end of the day, even though their companies benefit, we know in the back of our minds, the reason we're working so hard for our clients is that this helps them become successful individuals in their own respective companies, as well as have more fulfilled living in what they do. So let's talk a little bit about the innovation process while keeping in mind what's the real job behind what you're trying to innovate. So we have a 6-step kind of process, and just briefly, here's the way we think about innovation or innovating a product or service. First is we want to frame the challenge. The idea is that often leaders are too eager to jump right into the solution without taking time of framing the actual problem. So we encourage our clients to really frame the challenge well, try to understand the underlying presuppositions, and that has a lot to do with seeing the unseen, which is the second one. And that is looking beyond really the surface and understand the dynamics of how we think about problems and whether there are blind spots. And often what helps is to get people, your team, outside of norms of day-to-day operations and into an environment where they can think in many ways unusually from their day-to-day habits. And this is really important, that creating space for your team to actually think through a problem a little bit more clearly. This may be bringing in somebody outside to facilitate this experience as well. That type of investment is really important to actually coming to a place of that creative spark for a solution for an innovation problem. While they're understanding the dynamics of some of the blind spots, it's really seeing the idea of divergence, ideating divergence. This is where quantity matters the most, even more than quality. It's the sprint, and this may be the closest you've seen kind of to brainstorming activities, is the sprint towards a lot of ideas. But what's more important is after you come up with these ideas, where these ideas are not rejected, there are no no's, sky's the limit. These are blue sky ideas that then converge through what's often been called the last decade or a couple of decades is this notion of design thinking, of actually bringing it down and making a human-centric design or of a solution to a problem. And this is where you end up with 1 or 2, maybe 3 viable ideas on something that might actually work for your organization. And then once you have that, you can rapidly prototype that and think about what does this mean for day-to-day activities, for the organization, the structure, the budget, the resource allocations, all those various elements to quickly, rapidly prototype something that might become useful. And the idea is once you prototype, that's when the real questions emerge. And this is where you get really practical in the way you solve a problem. Because many of the questions that arise at this stage of development don't arise early on. And so the encouragement for you is to rapidly prototype something, even if it's not perfect, so that you can iterate it forward, which is the last step, is that no idea is ever really complete. It takes time for ideas to kind of grow. And another way to visually look at this, as you can see on the slide, is you start with a challenge, you expand by ideation divergence, and then you converge into design thinking so you can work towards a palatable solution. And since you're all leaders watching this video, I want to spend the last portion, and this is I think the most important portion, is understanding that it's not just the idea or the innovation you come up with, but how do you integrate and lead an organization forward? One of the ways to look at this is from something called the Gartner hype cycle. And this comes from primarily the technology industry, but I think it does a really good parallel mirroring of how ideas work. In this chart that you see in front of you, you see the technology trigger. You can view that as the idea trigger. And often what happens when a new idea comes forward is you quickly rise to the peak of inflated expectations. In other words, the idea becomes exciting. Everybody throws in their 2 cents on how to make the idea better. And before you know it, you have this huge idea. And at that point, everything's feeling very good. But something happens when you start to work towards the details, work towards actually, how am I going to actually get this off the ground? How do I get it to the market? And inevitably, most ideas end up in what's called the trough of disillusionment. This is the part where it gets very discouraging. You wonder if you have the right idea. You wonder if you just wasted your time in thinking about the idea. And it's in these moments that you have to push forward until you get to the slope of enlightenment, where ultimately you work through all of the complexities and you do your best to just persist. I mean, endurance and persistence is key in this stage of innovation, so that eventually you get to the plateau of productivity, where things actually start moving, they start being implemented, and there seems to be a lot more hope until the next trigger of an idea, and then you go through the cycle again. So as a leader, one of the areas that I found really helpful was actually it came from the area of psychology, where psychologists were working with people going through a significant tragedy or grief. And what we found is that type of help of people's mental states changing from a place of either pain, dislike, or suffering into a place of revitalization, renewal, and the ability to move forward in the midst of great difficulty gives us insight on how maybe leaders can change the mindset of a culture. Because as you've experienced, it's not that easy. In fact, it's very difficult to change people's minds, let alone their behaviors. So this change curve gives us a little sense. You'll notice on the bottom, it's just kind of the time frame that it's going to take for people to actually change their mind from one who opposes an idea to one who actually follows and participates and even contributes. And then you'll see the vertical axis talking about the morale and competence of the group. So whether it's you or your team, as a leader, there are certain things that must come to play. The first thing is whenever there's a new idea that is innovative, there's a good chance that for many people, they may actually literally be an intellectual shock. Because now you're introducing something that they may have not thought about, or potentially could be a threat to the way that they've experienced your leadership and your organization. So what happens is usually people enter a stage of denial. And this is just disbelief, looking for evidence that what you're saying is not true. And this stage is where people don't want to come to terms with the fact that you are going to bring something new. In these points, it's really important to think about alignment. You don't have to convert everybody into what you're thinking immediately, but it's kind of creating boundaries and framing, once again, the challenge. The second part that usually happens is in this downward slope is frustration. Recognition that things are different, and sometimes this may lead to anger in some, even in your core leadership team. And in these moments, it's really important to maximize the communication you offer them, to once again frame the challenge, but also communicate why what you're doing is so important to the life of the organization. And then there goes an even deeper slope where some people may end up in a some semi-depressed state, very low mood, lacking in energy, not eager to try something because if maybe the idea feels like you're adding something else to their plate. In these moments, it's really about motivation. It's less about skill sets. It's more about motivating your team to stay focused and energized and to remember the why behind what you're leading in innovation. The next step is experiment. This is the initial engagement with a new situation, maybe those on your leadership team or those in your organization, supporters, begin to experiment because they realize, hey, this change is going to happen whether I like it or not. So they're going to have to deal with that change. Giving people opportunity to develop capability to experience a new idea easily, whether it's through technology, whether it's through opportunity, whether it's a specific type of programming, to develop capability around this moment would be very key. And as they grow, there's a decision that's made, learning how to work in this new environment. And during that time, it's really important to share knowledge. Continue to build understanding by your supporters to say, this is why our organization or our business is continuing to develop good products and services and programs, and I want to be a part of that, to get them to that place of knowledge. And ultimately, that leads to integration, which is basically a renewed type of individual willing to participate with your leadership. The last couple of minutes, I just want to end with you, specifically the leader. All of this, whether framing innovation for your organization or developing a process, as well as integrating into the infrastructure and the workflow of an organization, is one thing. But if I can help you at just that personal level to do a few things for yourself as a leader in innovation, because leading innovation is a long-term commitment to healthy habits. And here's a few habits I'd like to highlight. The first is, in working with lots of innovative companies, one thing is very clear, is that good innovative leaders create space to think, reflect, and diverge. This may be a kind of a no-brainer, but it's surprising how many leaders don't take time to create space to think about their own organization. And I want to encourage you, this is essential. It is not a waste of time. It is something incredibly valuable that not enough people do. Because the idea is often, as a consultant or an advisor working for organizations and brands, I realize many times the ideas are already in the room. It's just that people didn't have space to think about their ideas. So if you can find moments throughout the week to actually take a few minutes off and section off a sacred time in your own schedule to really think, reflect, and diverge, I think you're going to be far better off. Secondly is to welcome the unexpected. Often innovation is a result of two or more ideas that seemingly unrelated ideas that connect and spark a solution. So in that case, getting out of your normal environments is key to innovation. Go to a network meeting of individuals from a completely different industry. Spend some time with them. Learn how others in other spaces think about problem solving, because that will help spark some ideas in the way that you're leading your respective organization. The third thing is also to play well and play often. Study after study show the importance of play for innovation, that your team needs to play. You need to play with them because play taps into parts of the brain that are not normally used in running an organization. Because it increases not only certain chemicals that are released within your body because of the competition, the problem solving required in play, that type of joy and laughter triggers things. And so I can't emphasize enough, and you can thank me later, is that play is an important part of staying innovative. The other thing is really to experience the miracle of writing things down. It's amazing because it's been shown in research that people talk about their ideas or talk about a new innovation and just keep and that's all they talk about, are actually less likely to actually implement, because talking about something over and over and over again tricks your brain into thinking you're actually doing something with that idea. So I challenge and encourage you, get in the habit of writing. Even if you're not a writer, it doesn't matter. The idea of putting it down on paper or in your computer is really important, because now it creates a reference point. So when you have conversations with others about new ideas, they have an inroad, a point of reference to actually make it better, or on-ramps in which they can actually participate with the idea. Here's the reality of innovation. It doesn't just happen. It takes some concerted, intentional effort to actually make it something worthwhile and beneficial to your organization. I love this quote by Alan Kay. It says, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." In other words, don't wait for the future to come. Help create the future by working in the area of innovation. And recently, I was in one of our clients' offices, and this is what was on a poster board on their site, and I think it's very true, is that inspiration does not favor those who sit still. It dances with the daring. If you dare to innovate, innovation will happen. And I'll leave you with these quick phrases that we have in our office, and this is what I share with our team, with leaders that I work with. 3 simple things. Think big, and I think a lot of you already do that. But start small, and the key word there is start. Start small, and this is, I think, one of the most important things about innovation is you got to keep moving. So if you can do some of these elements, I hope you walk away a little bit encouraged, or maybe even challenged to think about how you're innovating for your respective organization. Thanks for your time.